Hello, and thank you for joining me for the first lecture on Introduction to the Instructional Design Process, which is Chapter 1 out of our Morrison, Ross, and Kemp textbook. The first thing we want to talk about today is why instructional design. What is the purpose? Why is it here? Basically, the purpose of instructional design is to make learning more efficient and effective. All of you have probably sat in a class where some instructors present material very well and you're engaged and you came out learning a whole bunch. And then you've been in situations where maybe the instructor just was kind of out of touch and it was boring and you didn't see the relevancy. What you have there is probably one person who had some good instructional design thoughts or processes. They might not have thought about being instructional design, but they've really thought about how to make the learners engaged. And then you have someone who really didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about the impact of the training. So what you need to look at, the purpose of instructional design then, is to make it more efficient and effective. And those teachers that you've had that you remember as really great teachers probably made that a really effective, efficient, relevant class for you. And the second thing here is that instructional designers approach a situation by defining the problem and then determining what knowledge and skills are needed. So when you look at something, you have to say, what is the problem? What is it that the client, the teacher, the parent, the owner, what is it that they want their employees, students, children, etc. to know or do? And once you define that problem, what that gap is, where there's a disconnect, then you can determine what knowledge skills are needed. And therefore, in summary, just to put it in a little capsule, good instructional design creates a process which solves employee skills, knowledge, and deficiencies so that they can perform the way that they need to for their job. Instructional design, like we said, is a process that solves skill and knowledge deficiencies, and it starts by identifying the performance problem. And this is key. You need to start as an instructional designer by looking at what is the problem. Is it a lack of knowledge, lack of experience, lack of motivation, too many distractions? There's a plethora of things to look at, and we'll actually look at this in detail when we get to Mager and Pipe's model. But the important thing is to identify what the performance problem is, and not just the symptoms of what you're seeing, but why are you seeing that thing or that performance, that behavior. Then the most important question an instructional designer asks is whether or not instruction is the solution to the problem. A good instructional designer never assumes that instruction or training is the answer to all problems. In fact, 95% of the time, training isn't the answer. So with that, we get to the point that all paths, or many paths, not necessarily all, but many paths can lead to similar results. Two different instructional designers can look at the same situation. Hopefully they both can come to the same decision as to whether or not training would benefit the situation. But how they provide that training, what that training looks like, the order that is presented, it becomes kind of an art form at that point. There's many different ways to get to the end result. And so then you have to start talking about, well, do we use the word education? Are we educating people? Or are we training? And it really depends upon what you're actually trying to do. Education prepares an individual to be a contributing member of society. Usually it's in a fixed format, semesters, quarters. You're taking this class, there's specific goals and objectives that's outside the learners. It's you sign up to learn this course. It's preparing you to be a better member of society. Does everybody need to learn how to do instructional design? No. But for those people who want to know, to learn about this field, you can go for education. Training is different, and it's typically done in an organizational setting. Now, training can happen in college. It could happen in a medical field or anything like that. And as you do your job search project, you'll probably see that you're finding instructional design positions in a variety of fields. But training is done to provide a specific individual knowledge, skills, and information so they can perform a task or related group of tasks. So instead of just making, this is better for the world type of thing, better member for society, you're actually focusing on a specific individual or a group of individuals, and you're providing training for them to do their job better. So in higher ed, there's training that we receive on how to use Moodle. But then there's education that we can receive on, how do you, best use or teach online. So there's different areas and they kind of float back and forth. But the main difference is that training is usually specific, education slightly more global, and the other main difference is that education is usually fixed time frame. And training is often variable. It depends on the exact content that's being taught. So let's talk about some underlying premises of instructional design. And there's 7 of them listed in the chapter 1 that we want to cover. And the first one is that we need to look as instructional designers both at the system as a whole and at the details. So what does that mean? That means when you're involved in a process, you have a group of people that either need to learn something new. Maybe there's a new piece of software that's being introduced and everybody needs training on how to use it. Or maybe like the group project that you're going to have where you're actually working with some part of an organization to determine what training's needed. You need to look at the system as a whole. Where does this fit in as a whole? How does this software program relate to the other software programs? How does it relate to their jobs? So you have to understand how it fits in. And then you have to understand the specific details of the aspect you're trying to train. And again, for the software, how do you turn it on? How do you add files? How do you update? How do you make it do what you want to do? Those are the details of the system or of the product, but how does that fit into the overall scope of things? So you got to focus on both. And it all starts by the identification of the performance problem. I can't say this too much or too often. You just can't say, hey, I need training, come and do it. And as consultants, if you go down that field, or even if you're hired as a instructional designer or a trainer in an organization, people who aren't in the training field, the main thing they come to you and say, hey, I have a problem. My employees aren't doing what they're supposed to do, so give them some training so they'll start behaving the way they're supposed to or performing the way I want them. That's what everybody's going to say because they think training's going to fix it. Now, training may be a part of it, but often training isn't necessarily what's going to solve the problem. There's behavior issues, there's motivation issues, lots of different things there. So a good instructional designer will start by the identification of the performance problem. Then the instructional design plan is used by the design team and not the learners. One of the things you're going to start doing is that you're going to start developing your instructional design plan. There's lots of different steps with it. And the thing to remember is that there's 2 different types of materials that you're going to do. You're going to have an instructional design plan, which is going to be like the play-by-play sequence of what you're going to do to design and implement and facilitate that instruction. And then you're going to have instructional materials, which is one step of the plan, but these instructional materials is going to be what the learners actually use. So remember that the plan, the instructional design plan, is for use by the design team, which could include the client that you're working for, the different people on the design team. It could be subject matter experts. It could be anybody on the team. And that the plan should be made, your instructional design plan should be made so that all learners can succeed. And this is an important part because one of the aspects and steps of the instructional design plan is a learner analysis, where you actually have to do some study an analysis of the people who are going to be sitting in the class taking this, so that you can design and provide instructional materials in a way that's going to allow all of them, or at least the vast majority of them, to be able to use the materials and efficiently and effectively, and come out of the process having learned what they needed to know. And this is the point here, that the success of your instructional design plan is really going to be dependent upon the analysis that's conducted. And we're going to look at learner analysis and task analysis and a variety of different analysis that you're going to go through to make sure that the instruction and the information that you're providing meets the needs of the learners, the organization, the client, and it's safe and it's effective and it's legal, all that type of stuff. And the instruction design process focuses on the individual and not the content. And you can say, well, wait, you just said it, you have to cover certain knowledge and information. Yes, but you need to focus on the individual in terms of what you find out about them during the learner analysis. Like if I wanted to talk to you about how to change the oil in your car. Well, if you're a mom or somebody who doesn't really know that much about cars, you're going to have to use different words. You're going to have to use pictures. You're going to have to explain things differently than if you're providing instruction for a certified auto mechanic and this is just a different car that has a different oil change system. So the language is going to be different. It really has to focus on the individual. And finally, and this is very important to remember, is that there's really no single best way to design instruction. If the goals are met and the learners learn what they need to and the performance or the behaviors are changed, then that was successful. You can't say that online instruction's the best way or facilitator-led's the best way. It really depends on the situation, and like I said before, it's kind of an art form. Different people are going to have their own preferences, and it just depends on making sure you're aligning what you're creating with the needs and the desires of the client and the organization to meet the needs of the learner. So those are just some underlying premises to think about. And as we move towards our instructional design model in our textbook by Morrison, Ross, and Kemp, there's 4 components that drive the instructional design model. 4 questions, different components. And the first one is, for whom is the program developed? The main number 1 component is the learners. Who is it that we're doing this for? Second, what do you want the learners to know? And we call this the objectives. What is the objective? Specific, measurable objectives that the learner needs to be able to do to be considered successful. Then, how is this knowledge or skills best able to be learned? What are the strategies, the methodologies? What are you going to use to present or engage the learners in the content so that they meet these objectives? And finally, how do you determine the extent to which the learning is achieved? How do you evaluate this? What does it look like? Those are the 4 components of the instructional design process. The Morrison model that we're going to be using from your textbook has 9 elements in the middle. Instructional problems, what is it that we need to solve? The learner characteristics, who is it that we're designing the instruction for? Who is it that needs to learn? The task analysis, what are the elements of the task and where do the learners have gaps? What is the instructional objectives? At the end of this instruction, what are the learners going to be able to demonstrate or do? How do we best sequence the content to meet these needs? What strategies are we going to use to present this instruction? How do we design the message? What language, what pictures, what elements are best for the learner and the task at hand to meet these objectives? And then we have to develop the instruction, actually putting words to the page or fingers to the keyboard. And how are we going to evaluate whether or not they understand what's happening? And these 9 tasks are wrapped in ongoing process. Revision is one of the main things that happens. It's a constant cycle of revision and evaluation, and we'll talk about formative, summative, and confirmative evaluation, but this revision is a main circle. And the other circle talks about the planning, implementation, project management, and support services. So the inside ring that surrounds us is revision and evaluation. The outside is planning and project management. So as we move through and finish up this chapter, one of the things that you have to point out are what are the core values of instructional designers? What's the philosophy behind this field? And what we're doing here, there's 3 things that instructional designers hold as core values. One is that the system approach is the field's foundation. You can't develop training in isolation. You have to understand who the learner is, how they fit in the bigger organizational context, and how this training fits into the organizational context in order for it to be successful. The second one is that learning is a change in knowledge or behavior. What we're actually doing, we can provide training out as many days and times and hours that we want, but having somebody sit in training doesn't necessarily mean that they've learned anything. The only way that you can see if learning has occurred is by looking at behavior and their knowledge and seeing if there's been an increase or a difference in that. If there has, then you can say learning has occurred. And finally, achievement is the desired outcome of the instructional design process. We want our learners to be able to succeed and achieve at the tasks that they need to do. And that's really the whole crux of the instructional design process, is figuring out how we can help people achieve the behaviors, skills, and knowledge necessary so that they can succeed in their job or the task that they're trying to do. So that's chapter 1. I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter. Thank you.